Salesforce security. Apex sharing on standard objects lost on owner change. Hello. I was teaching a class on sharing and visibility architect for Trailhead today, and I was explaining Apex sharing and how when you create the share records, you need to designate a share reason. And I was showing, and then I showed this in one of my previous videos, where you need to go back to Salesforce Classic to create those custom share reasons. And then I explained that standard objects don't allow you to create custom share reasons. And the question was asked, well, if you're going to create custom Apex sharing on standard objects and you're forced to use the manual sharing reason, won't those be lost on ownership change? And I was like, I wasn't sure. So what I did in this video is I've spun up an org, 3 different users, and we're going to walk through seeing what happens when we use Apex sharing on an account object. And we're going to see what happens when we change ownership, what happens to the Apex sharing. It was it was what it sounds like, but it was surprising that it works that way. So I wanted to walk through and share this with you. So let's set the stage. So what we have is we have an org set up with 3 different users. In this first tab, this is the Steve user, and the Steve is sysadmin. On this org, this browser in incognito, we have Steve the alpha user. This is a standard user. And in the second one, we have the beta user. So we've got beta. So we've got alpha and beta with admin up here. Now what we're going to do is I have changed the sharing on account to private. So we have a private account. And so if we take a look, I have owned by this user, by the Steve user, I have all the accounts. And we're going to look at Burlington. So Burlington is owned by Steve. And we look and see that neither alpha nor beta can see any account. So this is as per expected. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at manual sharing. We're going to do a share record. We're going to do a manual sharing with alpha. So I'm sharing with alpha, read only, and I'm hitting save. So now we're going to go to alpha. And just as expected, we see Burlington. And then we're going to go down and look at beta. And not there. So this is as expected. Now what's going to happen is we're going to trigger an ownership change. So we're going to change owner to beta. So we're changing to beta. Now because Steve is still sysadmin with the view all modify all, he retains visibility. Now I'm going to go to beta, and I'm going to make sure that beta has received it. And we now see that beta has received ownership of Burlington. Now we had created a manual share for alpha, and now it's gone. So this is working as expected. Manual shares are deleted on change of owner. Now we're going to do is send Burlington back. So we're going to change owner, set it back to Steve. And now we'll get a little error. That's fine. So now we're back to where we started. Now what we're going to do is we are going to create an Apex share to send this record. So here is an Apex share record where we're going to be sharing this. And I then took a look at Teams, and we'll explain that in a moment. But for this first example, we're going to create an Apex share, and we're going to share the account with alpha, with read, and I'm going to use the only row cause I can, which is manual. So what I'm going to do is highlight, execute highlight. And what we now have is we can see that if we go over to alpha, alpha now has the visibility because of that share. We're going to go to beta, should not be there. So beta is not there. And in fact, we're going to go to Workbench and we're going to view the account share. And what we're going to do is grab all the fields on the share table for account share, and we're going to be able to scan this, and we're going to be able to see owner. These are all the accounts, and there is a manual share. There's the manual share we created. So now what's going to happen is this is an Apex share created with the reason of manual. Here is the surprising thing. We're going to change owner. It's not surprising because it is called manual, but we're going to change it to beta. Oh, excuse me. Let's bring it back. And what's happened is we needed to refresh. So we've refreshed and it's owned by Steve, and we're going to and let's double check that it's still shared with Alpha. They're still shared by Alpha, and we're going to send it to beta like we did before. Now, because it was Apex sharing, I might have expected it to stay there. So here, let's make sure it was received. Beta's received it. Let's take a look at Alpha. And I refresh, and it's gone. And so that does make sense that we've used a manual sharing reason, but we have just lost that access. So if we were to do this with custom objects, we'd be creating a custom share reason, and it would survive ownership change. Now, we say, what are the share reasons? There aren't the standard Apex sharing reasons. So if we take a look at Apex sharing reasons, and it only works on custom objects. And so we go look at sharing using Apex in this article, and it gives us the row cause, creating Apex sharing, and we start to follow this code. But if we use a sharing reason only allowed for custom, so we are kind of trapped. We can't create a custom, and the only one we can create is manual. Is a manual sharing. So now we're going to send this record back. We're going to change owner. We're going to try to send it back to Steve. Now Steve has received it. We're going to refresh. Steve is the owner. Now what we are going to try is we're going to run that same code, and we're going to try to send it over as a different sharing reason. We're going to say, instead of manual, we're going to go use team. So we'll say, can team membership survive ownership change? We're going to execute highlight, but now we see that we are not allowed to insert a share record with that sharing role. So we're trapped. And so then the next thing is, I said, so right now at this point, if you create Apex sharing on an account object and the ownership changes, the share records are wiped out. So you would have to, the only way to mitigate this would be to create a trigger on ownership change and add the shares back in again. So then I said, well, what if I add a team member? Will that survive an ownership change? So in here, I went to account teams. And so I have my account teams, and I've activated the account teams. We're going to take a look. We're going to make sure that Steve owns Burlington. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a account team member for Alpha. This is valid code. And now we can go to Alpha and verify that Alpha, it's there. And in fact, what we can do is refresh Burlington and look at the account team, and there's Alpha added to the account team. So that's great. We now have Alpha. Instead of adding them as a manual share, we've added Alpha as an account team member. That's powerful. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change owner and send it over to beta, like we've been doing. So we sent it to beta. Now we're going to refresh in beta. Beta's received it, but it's gone. And so team membership is wiped out, is erased on ownership change. So we had tried to use Apex sharing and have it survive an ownership change. And we tried team membership and see if it would survive an ownership change. So neither one survive an ownership change. And you can see our demonstration. And none of the other sharing reasons are available for us to be able to use. So to summarize, Apex sharing is very powerful, also called programmatic sharing, and it allows us to programmatically create share records with complicated business rules. And had we put them on custom objects, we'd be able to create a custom sharing reason, and therefore those share records would stay there even if the ownership changed. However, because standard objects don't allow us to create custom share reasons, we are forced and only allowed to use the manual sharing reason, and that gets wiped out on ownership change. The team membership also wiped out on ownership change. So the way you're going to have to do that is if you want to have Apex sharing on standard objects, you're going to need to put a trigger also listening for a change of the account, change of owner, and whatever logic you use to put the sharing on, you're going to have to put it back on again. Now, had you had external objects feeding in those share records, this could be a problem. Some scenarios you could have integrations with complicated sharing that could be pushing in those share records. And so that could be an issue. And so this was a great question brought up by one of my students in class, and it is true. Apex sharing is wiped out on ownership change on standard objects because you're forced to use the manual share reason. Very interesting. And you're going to have anyone who's using Apex sharing on standard objects is going to need to take this into account and handle it. Thank you for sharing on the owner and seeing the intricacies. Join me again, same bat time, same bat channel. Subscribe to www.stevetechark.com and come to YouTube, Steve Tech Arc. Have a great day.